Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Payo, and I'm the Director of Mentoring and Community Engagement with APEX, the Colorado Office of Attorney Professional Excellence. And we are here to present a panel discussion of the ethics of influence, building relationships that build your practice. Just a few housekeeping tips. We will not be able to, we are in webinar mode, so we won't be able to see you or hear you. If you have tech issues, usually if you log out and log back in, that can solve things, but we won't be able to help you on our end. There will be a CLE credit for it, one ethics credit and one general credit. I'll put the course ID in the chat towards the end of the webinar. And our panelists today will be Kirby Joseph, Chad Coleman, and Julian Isbicki. Julie Isbicki is the retired partner at Fortis Law Partners. Chad Coleman is the founder of Hero Smith, and Kirby is the managing partner at Joseph and Hall. Julian, how about you introduce yourself, and then we'll go around and then we'll get started.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Julian Isbicki. Grew up in the Jersey Shore, went to Brandeis University and the University of Michigan Law School, and then came to Denver in 1980 to start my career. I spent the first 8 years of my legal career doing commercial litigation. And what I learned during the course of those 8 years was one, I hated doing commercial litigation. I hated fighting with people. And two, I wasn't very good at it. So late in 1988, I did a dramatic pivot and I started a law practice from scratch. That means with zero clients to become a small business lawyer. And I practiced. So I continued to be a business lawyer until I retired in August 1 of 2024. In my presentation, I'll explain how it is I went from zero clients to a strong law practice.
Great. Chad, how about you go next?
Hey everyone, I'm Chad Coleman. I'm the founder of a small business marketing agency called Hero Smith. I'm excited to be here today to discuss this topic and see if I can add any insights from a more traditional marketing or digital marketing perspective around, creating an authentic brand that helps you find your ideal clients.
Great. Kirby?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kirby Joseph. I'm the managing partner of Joseph and Hall. Joseph and Hall is an immigration law firm. I started my practice in 1998 and, originally went to the public defender's office, then started my own practice, and over the years have grown it. We're about a firm of 20 people now. And over the years, I also started a law practice management consulting company where I consult with law firms around the country on the day-to-day best practices of operating their law firms. I have 8 attorneys that work for me. And so today I'm going to be talking about, the role of an attorney and also the role of a manager when it comes to marketing and managing your practice.
Perfect. Just to our attendees also, since we can't see or hear you, if you want, we will be taking questions through the webinar. We won't save them to the end. I'll be monitoring the chat or the QA where you can put them in. And so let's get started. Kirby, the juxtaposition between practicing law and managing a firm, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think that, there's a big difference between being a practicing attorney and managing your own law firm. And the biggest difference, is that when you're an attorney, you're really focused on the individual client and that client's experience. So, you're focused on the legal work that you're doing on that client's case, how you communicate with that individual client, your legal strategy with that individual client. And when you're a manager of a law firm, your focus is not on the individual client, but on the client's experience as a whole. So you're really more focused on the overall big picture of systems. What is the best way to do client intake? What is the best way to market your firm as a whole, not just as an individual attorney? How do you prepare your representation agreements so that they can fit all of your clients, not just one particular client? So it really is the big picture. I would say that one of the areas that I see come up a lot is, how should an individual attorney market themselves versus a firm market themselves? And are those, mutually exclusive almost? So, like in my practice, I'll have conversations with attorneys where they're not quite sure how to market themselves and if it's consistent or inconsistent with how the firm might want to market itself. And, I believe really strongly that individual attorneys should market themselves and that ultimately it's to the benefit of the firm as a whole to have their attorneys out there marketing and growing the reputation of the firm as a whole. I think it's the manager of the firm's responsibility for helping their attorneys to figure out, what type of clients we want, what type of work do we want to do. How do we want to be seen in the community? What kind of reputation are we trying to, go for here? So there's a lot of different ways to market out there, and there's a lot that may or may not fit any particular firm. And so it would be the manager that would say, for example, I might say, it's not a good idea for us to go out to a community park and set up a tent and advertise ourselves that way because that's not the type of client we're going for. And then once the manager is able to establish, what is our ideal client on a whole for the firm and come up with those types of guidelines, then to have their individual attorneys go out into the community, sort of marketing themselves and also finding what their niche is. I have an example is I have an attorney at my firm who, we were trying to help her figure out what type of marketing she could do that would be beneficial not only to herself but to the firm. And so we sat down with her and asked her, what is it that you enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis, outside of law? What do you enjoy doing? And she's really into yoga and she's really into wellness. So we said, that's awesome. You should use that as a form of marketing. And so she loved that idea and she joined the wellness committee for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And she now is chair of that committee and she speaks nationally and she's, being referred cases from all over the country that have nothing to do with wellness, but they have to do with the reputation that she built by doing something that she loved out in the community. So I think that, as a manager of a firm, my responsibility is really to work with my individual attorneys to figure out what their individual interests are and how they can individually market themselves for the benefit of the firm as a whole. Perfect.
That's excellent. What a great opportunity for that associate, for her to blossom that way. So pivoting to ethics, do you run into any ethical issues? For instance, what ethical lapses do you commonly encounter in rainmaking when running a firm?
I think that there are a couple big ones. If a firm doesn't have proper systems in place, like, systems being how we're going to do things on a consistent basis. I think that consistency across a firm is really important. And so, how are we going to handle billing? How are we going to handle client intake? How are we going to handle when we get off of a case or close a case? How are we going to disengage from a matter? Systems are important so that everybody within the firm, all the attorneys, all the paralegals are sort of following the same rule book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the ethical issues come up when people within the firm don't really understand what the firm stands for, what the firm's rules are, what the firm is expecting. And so I think that it's the firm's responsibility to sort of really focus on that big picture and communicate that to their staff so that their staff can understand, what they're doing. So, for example, when selecting clients, I think that one of the biggest things is the inability for a lot of attorneys to see the red flags that exist when they're in like a client intake. And it's not only about, is this a good client because they can pay? It's, has this client been through 3 other attorneys? And what does that tell me about this client? Or, does our firm have the capacity to take on this client? Do I have the capacity to take on this client? How much hand-holding is this client going to require? Is that something that I or my firm is capable of? So I think that, a lot of the ethical issues come up, I see, when people become overly anxious or overly preoccupied with the idea that they have to bring on business and aren't very thoughtful about the type of business they want to bring on. Another problem I commonly see is after the client intake, when you determine whether or not it's a client you want to take on, then there comes the representation agreement where you lay out the scope of work that you want to do on a client's case. And I frequently see attorneys that sort of lose focus on the big picture and are so focused in on their legal work at that moment that they neglect to realize when they're going outside of the scope of the representation that they've been hired to do, which leads to a lot of problems if you're working on something that you think the client wants you to do, but ultimately the client hasn't given you authorization to do. So, I think it's really the management's responsibility to sort of train and mentor the attorneys to know exactly, to really be thoughtful about these things and to, not just set your attorneys free to go market without any sort of guardrails in place about what type of clients, what those clients are going to look like, what type of cases, and how we're going to communicate with the clients.
Perfect. There's a lot of crossover when we get to Chad about marketing that I'm sure he can comment on. What surprised you most when you moved from practicing law to managing a firm or to managing a firm?
I think probably what surprised me is just how much is involved in managing a firm and how much happens behind the scenes that you're not really aware of. It's funny because I'm actually in a position where I have 3 other partners, but I've always had them focusing more on the legal aspect of casework, mentoring other attorneys and whatnot. And we are just now starting to spend a lot of time training them on what is it that Kirby does behind the scenes, because I think the biggest surprise is that they don't really realize what management entails. It really involves keeping your eye on the day-to-day over big picture operations of the firm. How do you make the client's experience the best? Not just one individual client, but all clients and the reputation of the firm. And how do we continue to develop that and grow that and keep things consistent, and streamlined? I think it's also interesting that whenever I'm hiring new staff, it's very common for people to tell me that the reason why they're even looking at our firm is because they know that we have a reputation for policies and procedures. And I think that that's really important to attorneys, but they don't really realize it till they don't have it. But having systems in place that you can rely upon allows you as an attorney to be able to do what you do best, which is to practice law. So I think you don't really appreciate that until you're in that role, and realize it's much bigger than you ever thought it was.
Brilliant. It sounds like it's a branding thing in terms of the infrastructure that you've built at your firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I'm really proud of when people tell me that in that situation. I'm really proud of the fact that, out of all these law firms out there, we have this reputation for being very well organized and managed. And I think that is something that people do value, not only your employees, but your clients. It resonates with your clients. If clients, you do build a reputation where if clients have a bad experience because your attorneys are disorganized, or they don't receive a really good communication, or it's very sporadic, that does impact your reputation in the community. So I think as a manager, you really sort of are responsible for framing what that's going to look like for your individual attorneys, your clients, the community.
I would imagine as an associate, that must be very reduce the stress because you have the systems in place so you can actually focus on representing your client.
I think that has been my experience. Yeah, I have a new associate that started maybe 9 months ago. And, I think it is very comforting for her and for others to know that there are systems in place. If a question comes up, like a client is not paying their bill, what do I do? To have policies and procedures in place that sort of, or people to talk to in management that can say, okay, well, here's what we do firm wide. It's not about your particular client. It's about what is the firm's policies in general when it comes to clients that are overdue on their bills. And I also think that, I also believe that if for example, if you let clients not pay their bills, that gets out in the community.
Oh, wow.
And so, it really does. Maybe more in the work that I do in immigration. But, if you are, I think my reputation amongst immigration law firms is that, we charge a fee. We believe we deserve a certain fee. We're experts in what we do. And so if you're not going to be willing to pay for our services, we're not the right firm for you. But the minute one of my attorneys starts to not really care if they collect or provide free legal services without it being a pro bono case, then that starts to translate into the reputation that, we don't really enforce our policies when it comes to paying bills. And then that starts to generate a new flow of clientele that will come in the door that will expect that we're a little bit more flexible. So I would rather personally have the reputation for, when we say we want to be paid, we want to be paid. And then clients will come to us that understand that that's the expectation.
Wow. Great information. How does thinking like a manager change the way you approach client relationships? You've touched on this a little bit. Is there more that you'd like to expand on that?
I just think that really keeping in mind the big picture, it's not about individual communication. It's about thinking about how as a firm are we going to communicate with clients, and understanding, ethically speaking, I think communication is one of the biggest ethical pitfalls that we get into as attorneys. So if we as managers can kind of create the guardrails of what communication for the firm is going to look like, I think that does translate into making it easier for the attorneys to manage their relationships with clients. So I think, again, just really focusing on taking a step back and focusing on the big picture. As attorneys, it's just, I've done that, right? I've been an attorney doing casework and not managing, and you lose sight of the big picture. You're so focused on winning your individual client's case that you forget to take a breath and think about, have I even been hired to do the work I'm doing? Is this even, the client's bill has gotten outrageously high. Have I even communicated to the client that their bill is higher than expected, and do they want me to continue working on it even though it's more than I originally communicated to them? So I think it's just it's so hard. I think that's the biggest struggle I see between attorneys, and what, the difference between maybe an attorney and a manager, and something I would encourage attorneys to try and pay more attention to, even in the own individual practices is just slowing down, taking a breath, and every once in a while in the case, maybe once a month when you're going through your bills or you're reviewing things, it's a good time to take a step back and instead of focusing on the details of each individual case, really thinking about what am I not thinking about, which is, am I working within the scope? Have I, things like that.
That's brilliant because it actually takes the client into consideration. It's not just managing the scope for the practicing attorney, it's also moderating client expectations because if you're doing work that they didn't hire you for, then it's not a service to them as well. That uh, before, is there anything you want to follow up with that? And then we're going to pivot to Chad.
Well, let's go ahead and pivot to Chad, and if anything else comes up, we can loop back. But I think that I'm really interested in hearing what Chad has to say because I think that another thing that I think is really important as the manager of my firm, like I sort of already said, is to sort of communicate to my staff, what is our ideal client, and based on that, what does that mean for our marketing efforts? Because obviously, I always tell my attorneys, marketing for a new attorney sort of looks like throwing spaghetti at a wall. And I feel like as me as the manager of my firm, I don't want spaghetti all over the wall. I want us to be very thoughtful about who's our client and therefore who are we marketing to and how are we going to market to that group. So Chad, I'm hoping that that's kind of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kirby. I think you said a lot of great things, and your firm is in very good hands with you as the manager and thinking about the overall idea of branding. A few of the things that caught my eye was it is really about finding your ideal clients because there's a tendency, especially with new business owners and people starting their own firms, they'll just kind of take whatever clients come their way. And I think that can really harm the brand of a firm right from the beginning because, ideally, pardon the pun, you want the ideal client to come to your firm because they're ideal for you and you're ideal for them, meaning they're going to flow perfectly through your processes. You're going to be able to do a great job in their case because it's the type of case that you're an expert at. And, it can be daunting to start a business or a law firm, which, obviously you don't get taught that in law school. That's one of the things I love about Apex and is that they focus on some of these other, aspects of running your own firm. And yeah, when you create that, absolutely. When you bring in those ideal clients and you're able to attract them, they flow through your processes. They have a great experience. They become advocates of yours in the public, doing things in sort of the digital world, like leaving you a great Google review or a video testimonial on a social media platform or something like that, but also just telling their friends and giving you, a recommendation or a referral to their friends and family who, need the same types of legal services. And that all starts by figuring out your niche, right? Like, what is the type of client and firm that you want to be? What are the type of cases that you want to take on? And a lot of the work we do is about finding and defining what your brand is all about. And that can be really hard, right? Because you got a lot of things up in your head and especially if you start to bring in other people, into your firm, maybe you have a partner or whatever, and you tend to think that you're on the same page with these things. But when we do the kind of brand workshops and things that we do, we find that there's a lot of different ideas that need to be put out there in front of everyone and to really be understood and defined. And I think one of the most important things is defining the values of your organization, because you know you want to kind of have authenticity, right, in your in your practice and obviously in your marketing as well. I think a lot of people shy away from marketing because because it feels icky, sales, marketing kind of have a bad reputation, I guess. I don't know why, but but I think when you have marketing that you feel comfortable with and you work with someone, like ourselves at Hero Smith, and you kind of really define those core values, you're in a really good position because those around you who are helping you out, whether you're a solo practice and you just have maybe an administrative assistant or an office manager helping you out, or even if you don't, you when you have a set of values, you empower your language that you use when you talk about your practice. You empower your coworkers and fellow employees with a set of values that are easier to follow. If a lot of people, a lot of businesses, especially as they get super huge, they kind of become a rules-based organization. And that can be a little bit dangerous, right? Because defining your organization by the rules is a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. You can't, it's hard to get a rule for everything. But when you create an organization intentionally from the beginning to be a values-led organization, on the flip side, you kind of empower everyone that you bring in, as long as you share these values and it's something that your firm is putting out. You kind of empower people to act with their own agency because they have a deep understanding of the core values and the mission of your firm. And so, I think Kirby touched on a lot of really great stuff there. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate everything you said, Kirby. I think you're doing a great job over there.
Thank you.
So, Chad, you talked about the reputation of sales and marketing. What's the difference between marketing that creates attraction versus marketing that feels pushy?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think, frankly, a lot of people don't market themselves or their practices because they feel inauthentic about it, and they feel like just generally that's I mean, when I was growing up, like most lawyers didn't do any marketing, right? But now we have all these, because it was all like billboards and TV and radio, and that was sort of a certain section of attorneys. But now that obviously we have all these different platforms, these digital platforms, you're really expected to put yourself out there. And I think the key to the whole thing is having a marketing framework that feels authentic to you, that's derived from your core values, and that kind of consistently put out there. And rather than because here's the bottom line: people hate to be sold. Fortunately for us, for everyone that owns a business, they love to buy still, and they need to buy. Sometimes they need help. Not one person can do everything, right? And so when you create a marketing system or a framework that empowers you with core values, instead of being salesy, you perhaps use your expertise to educate people in the market, to provide some sort of value up front to them. And a magical thing happens. You start to attract the type of clients that you want because they're resonating with the things that you're putting out there. And there's a lot of opportunities to do this. Unfortunately, we live in a world with a lot of problems, but good for lawyers and really all types of businesses solve problems. So there's plenty of problems to be solved. But I think in Kirby's case, it's really an interesting case study right now because there's so much going on in the immigration space, and we work with tons of immigration law firms across the whole country. And this, kind of putting all the craziness of it aside and the politicalness of it aside, there's a massive opportunity to really help people and to give them valuable information that in this current climate could actually save their life, and keep them, in the country or whatever their goal is, right? So, and that's just one example. You can make marketing that feels authentic to you once you learn how to do that. It's a skill that you have to develop as as a business owner, just like, managing people or, keeping track of your books and thinking about margins. Marketing is a skill too. And when it flows from you because it's authentic and you're putting, something out there that's helpful to people, it kind of gets rid of that weird kind of, I don't know, slimy, salesy feeling, right? That sort of no one wants to have. Um, and
Chad,
yeah,
I think I was just thinking about what you're saying, and I do think that I think that being authentic in your marketing is really important. And I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think that, for me, I'm the founder of my firm. And so I think that in my position, it's just very natural. It's like the firm is like my fifth child almost, in
right.
the sense that, when I talk about it, it's just like there's this like passion you have for it. So it's not like you're trying to sell anybody on anything. It's
Right.
just, I think, getting out there in the community and doing what you do in your everyday life, but being very free about speaking about what you do. And as an immigration attorney, that's not always a safe place to be in. But I
Right.
think,
Yeah.
it is a necessary thing. It's like, I remember being at the soccer field with my little kids and having conversations. And, that turns into work because people realize, for example, in the immigration world, oh, I have a nanny that I might want to, I mean,
Right.
it
Help
leads
out.
to
Yeah.
just being yourself and
Mm.
sharing what you do in the community naturally does lead to work.
Yeah. And the nice thing about where we are in this moment of technology is that you can do that online as well, and kind of make that same kind of, good-hearted, willing to help kind of attitude work for you well beyond just the people that you happen to meet, day to day who know your attorney and maybe ask you a question. You can it kind of makes it scalable in this digital marketing world that we live in now. And yeah, I think Kirby, and I'm sure you do this just based on our limited interactions, I can already tell. But I think one of the big challenges for someone in your position is to make everyone feel as comfortable and have like the language tools to do the same thing that you're doing when they're talking about their firm or when they're meeting people in public that might need help, or obviously like visiting events and things like that for networking purposes. It's about really having, for someone like yourself, I think it's really valuable, and you probably do something like this, but I think the framework that we create is something I tell my clients, hey, share this with every new employee. Put
Mm.
a half an hour on the schedule, or an hour, whatever you're comfortable with. Go through talk about your mission as a company, talk about each core value, kind of explain where they come from, why you have this value as an organization. And really try to ingrain that into the new partners that you might bring in, or the new attorneys you might bring in, because obviously as a manager like yourself, wants everyone kind of rowing their oars in the same direction, right?
Mhm.
And because when you have that consistency, that really helps you create like a snowball effect in your brand and your marketing, and bring in more business.
Yeah, I
I
think all
think,
those values go together to create your culture. So,
Absolutely.
when we're interviewing new staff, we do that and it's very common for anybody that's interviewing to say, "What is the culture of your firm like?" And that's a great opportunity to be like, "Here are the values, and these values not only are the values that create the culture of our firm, but also that create the client experience." And so anything that
Right.
we do marketing is in an effort to further these values. So yeah, I think that's really
Absolutely.
important. And I do think that it requires, and I have used somebody like you in the past to walk you through that. It's not an easy thing to just sit down at your desk and think, what are my values?
Right.
It's very helpful to have a guided discussion about that. And, I actually am staring across my desk right now, and I've got all of these pads of long paper that have, my brainstorming with my firm about that kind of stuff. And I would say it probably is something that you touch on maybe every 3 to 5 years, you revisit it because these
Absolutely.
things do change over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it sounds like you're doing all the right things. And I don't often talk about the inside stuff, right? Because my focus obviously is helping, law firms and other types of businesses, attract and get new clients and grow their revenue. But you're right. It is. The values have to be both on the outside and something we put out into the world so that we're able to authentically talk about our firm and attract magnetically the right type of clients to it. But it has to come from the inside of the firm, right? Come from the culture, and yeah, and that way, that's where the authenticity is created. I think we've all heard horror stories about fancy values that people put out there, and then there's plenty of examples throughout business history where when you find out later, the Enrons of the world or something, that might not have been true. And so I think it's literally the people like yourself that have to bridge that gap and keep that consistent and make sure that you're revisiting it, sharing it with everyone, making sure these are sort of internalized for everyone that that's going to talk about your firm or be out there in the world representing you.
Mhm.
Brilliant. So it sounds, Chad, that it's more of an organic process rather than something from the top down, and how that also gives agency to the people that are in the organization, so that they're empowered, and that's where the authenticity comes from.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it would be like really difficult to, because like in a law firm setting, or a law firm setting, you're going to have different attorneys meeting people, talking to people, and it's going to be really difficult for them, and it would frankly sound funny if they all said the exact same thing. If I met one of Kirby's associates at a networking event, and I had just met Kirby and they said the exact same thing in the exact same way, it might feel weird for the other person, right? For myself in that example. So when you have those values established, and you put them out in the world and internalize them in your culture, I think the really cool thing is that it's about what they mean and not the exact words, right? So each attorney, each associate, even your office manager or whatever other types of employees you have in your firm, if they're going to kind of remix it, for lack of a better expression, and kind of say it in their own way, but as long as the through line is consistent, you can sort of benefit from the power of that. And Kirby mentioned that. I was just going to say that it is super difficult. Like, I do this for people and have for 25 years. And it's really one of those things where when you sit down to, like, what are our values? How do we want to talk about our firm? What do we want to put out there? It can be really difficult. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or something, and because you're so in it, right? It's your baby, this company, this firm that you're building. It's very important to you. I think Kirby called it her fifth child, right? And it's like, and that's so true. And because of that, it can be tempting to kind of focus on yourself. But that's kind of the tough thing about marketing. And the reason we call our firm Hero Smith is because you actually have to place your ideal client in the role in all of your marketing materials as the hero. Make yourself the guide that helps that hero, accomplish their goal. But that can be really hard to do because, obviously we own the business. We love what we do. We're experts in our fields. And like I said, even for myself, even though I've helped literally thousands of companies come up with, value propositions, taglines, marketing campaigns and all this stuff. When I go to do it for myself, it's 10 times harder because I don't have that objective outsider or someone like sort of challenging me or just helping me like see it in a different way. So yeah, so I think that's an important aspect to all this. Getting a little bit of outside perspective can be incredibly valuable because sometimes you just don't even know what questions to like ask yourself, right? So,
I almost
Wow.
think it's probably like the owner and manager's role to determine the ideal client. But then once because that really represents the big picture firm, like who is the firm servicing? But then once you know that, then you shift into the putting yourself in the client's position, once you have determined
oh
your
yeah,
need.
yeah. You need to establish like a good niche, and not try to be too broad based. Even though a lot of attorneys I know, I mean, I've grew up around attorneys. My mother was a paralegal and worked for the prosecutor's office, and then worked on the defense side for a little while as well. I think you're sort of right about that in the sense that yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. I think you don't want to spread yourself too wide, even though everybody learned a little bit of everything in law school, right? So and I know I've gotten help from attorneys that focus on business that help me out with different things, that are just like family friends of ours that, when I've needed legal advice. But in the broader sense, like having a niche is super important. And the interesting thing that people don't think about is like your values as an organization, there's a direct correlation to your ideal customer. They should essentially share the same values that you do. I mean, they might say it differently. They might, not even consciously like, talk about a particular value of your firm, but there's sort of a matrix there where they align,
Hmm.
having the niche, having the those core values established, and having the literally like the language tools to talk about those things in a way that feels internalized is super powerful, and something I think every business owner and certainly every law firm owner should consider.
It sounds like your clients do the inner work and then you do the smithing of it, the tool.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And our stuff is really collaborative. I wanted to create a firm I had worked, since early in my career, like even in the 90s. I'm really dating myself here. But I had worked at firms that basically were all going after the same clients, and Fortune 1000 companies, 500, 100, if we, Fortune 100 companies, if we could get them. I had the pleasure of working with some amazing organizations, everything from, Pop Secret Popcorn and, Harry Potter and, NASCAR. I mean, it runs the gamut. But ultimately, I wanted to create an organization that was affordable, that brought high-end branding and marketing to small business owners. Because frankly, I spent most of my career making shareholders a little bit richer, and I don't know what impact that had. But with Hero Smith, we sort of thought like, well, if we could create and empower, business owners with these kind of ideas for an affordable price that, a small company just starting out could afford, that's going to create real value in the communities those people are in. They're going to be able to, if they're getting a consistent lead flow of ideal clients coming in, they're going to be able to expand their firm and maybe bring in another attorney or an office, assistant or something like that to help them, kind of increase their volume. And or they're just going to, be able to send their kid to college or not worry about saving for that, and that creates real value in the community. So like our stuff is like really collaborative. We cut out one thing that I didn't like about working at bigger firms, was that there was all these middle people that kind of like, you know, they're professional, procrastinators, I call them, and they kind of like, are the in between like the creatives and the developers and and the client, and it's wrought with inefficiency. So the way we make ourselves affordable is actually by having one-on-one conversations and leveraging the power of the business owner, the entrepreneur, and their knowledge and passion for what they're doing, and collaborating, having a branding marketing expert that collaborates with them to kind of get the best of both worlds and kind of cut out all the middlemen that kind of drive up prices and stuff like that, and actually hurt communication rather than help it.
Thanks, Chad. So Julian, tell us about your hero's journey.
Sure. So as I said, I started a practice from scratch in 1988 to focus on representing small businesses. And so in terms of core val, just to talk about that for a minute in terms of Chad's verbiage, I mean, my value proposition with clients was all about cost effectiveness and efficiency. Because we were working with small businesses, I had every kind of client known to man. But they all shared one thing in common. They were all cost conscious, every last one of them. And so I quickly realized that prac being cost effective, being efficient, actually doing that and communicating that we were and being cognizant of that really worked great. I mean, all through my career, people recognized that and acknowledged that. And if you looked at my Google reviews, you would see that over and over again. I don't know what caused me to figure that out so quickly, but it made my practice. So anyway, so I hung a shingle out. I had no clients. I had to figure out how to find clients. I did all kinds of things. And then I settled on two strategies that seemed to work really well for me. One of those strategies I called rooms to sit in, thinking about what rooms could I sit in where I could get to know the people in the room. It's not a room you sat in once. It's a room you sat in over a long period of time. You got to know the people in the room, and relationships would develop and work would come. Here's my single best example of that. And I'm going to talk about examples in the context of my being a business lawyer, but but I think other lawyers in other practice areas can use the concepts, just different examples, but the concepts apply to lots of lawyers in lots of practice areas. So I joined a Chamber of Commerce committee called the Micro Business Task Force, focused on providing programming to the smallest members of the downtown Chamber of Commerce. And that was perfect for me because back then I jokingly referred to my marketing plan as bottom fishing, a bunch of little businesses that other lawyers weren't competing for. Those were my people. And the committee got along great. We met for 3 years. We put on programming. Just the chemistry, the synergies were great. So this was from 1991 to 1994. And so who was the chair of this committee? It was a woman named Peg, who was a business broker. I didn't know anything about business brokers. But in 1994, she asked me if I wanted to do a closing. I didn't even hustle her. She asked me if I wanted to do a closing. And I said, I don't know, tell me what's involved. She told me. I then went back to the office. Talked about this with my paralegal, Sydney. I said, should we do this? And Sydney said, let's do it. I called Peg. I said, we'll do it. That one closing led to my doing hundreds of closings for business brokers and becoming one of the most dominant lawyers in the business broker space in Denver. And for the next 30 years of my career, my practice focused on small business transactions, then over time, small and medium-sized transactions. So just sitting in that room and developing a relationship, being patient over a long period of time, bore incredible amounts of fruit. Other examples of rooms were other chambers of commerce programs, CEO exchanges, where they put together non-competing business owners and you serve as a board of advisors to one another. I got some of my best clients and some of my best referral sources from that. I was involved. Once I got involved with business brokers, then I would go to the business broker trade association quarterly meetings. It would take something dramatic for me to miss a quarterly business broker meeting. I got to know brokers just from being in a room with them, meeting after meeting, and developed relationships. I joined the Internet Chamber of Commerce. I was the only lawyer in a room full of techies. That was great. I joined Rotary clubs and my health club. I mean, to just like Kirby said, I would every year I would generate more revenue from my health club than I paid in basic dues. Just because I would talk to people, I'd be in the locker room and I would start a conversation. Rooms to sit in for me was a powerful tool. What are the rules about rooms to sit in? One, you need to want to be in the room. There are lots of rooms. Don't choose a room that you do not want to be in. That's just going to be unpleasant, and everyone's going to know you're not happy, and it won't work. The second rule is be committed to doing the work of the room. Whatever that is, on the small business task force, I did the work of the task of the committee, putting on programming or whatever it is. When you join a Rotary Club, that's a service organization. You can't join just to market. You have to do the service work of the Rotary Club or and but you get to know people. You go to meetings every week. You get to know people, and inevitably business comes from developing relationships. So rooms to sit in was my first and best strategy. My second strategy I called gatekeepers, but that's really referral sources. Meeting people who can be referral sources not once, but multiple times. Initially, it was lawyers because I only knew lawyers. Then, because I was doing small business work and a lot of startup work, it became CPAs. Then, when I got focused on business transactions, it became business brokers, SBA lenders, and then over time, investment bankers as I was able to do larger deals. So, what are the rules about gatekeepers? Be a resource to your gatekeeper. So in the early 90s, Colorado was third in the country and adopted an LLC statute in 1990. I would rip out articles out of the Colorado Lawyer, I would photocopy them, and I would mail these copies to like 20 CPAs I had relationships with. We were trying to figure out what's an LLC, how do they work, so I would serve as a resource. I would try to help these CPAs because we're all figuring it out, clearly violating some author's copyright, but nobody seemed to complain. You know, I would give, at CABI, the Business Broker Trade Association, I would give talks to them. I would write articles. I would tell the business brokers who referred me deals, the quid pro quo for my getting referrals from you is I'm going to always be available to help you. If you're working on a deal and there could be two other lawyers in that deal, but you think I could be helpful, call me whenever. I'll stop what I'm doing and I will help you because you're an important referral source. I will support you. Uh, so be supportive of your gatekeepers. The second thing is give referrals to your gatekeepers. The best way to get a referral is to give a referral. I call that priming the pump. Almost guaranteed. You give a referral, you'll get a referral. Okay, so those were the two strategies that I used. And understand this was late 80s, early 90s. This isn't a pre-internet time. There was no LinkedIn, there was no social media, there weren't websites. I did it. I call these old school marketing techniques. And I think they still have validity. I would be on LinkedIn and I wasn't connected to every business lawyer in town, but I was probably connected to five or six. I would see incredible content that they were putting up. Holy mackerel. I actually emailed some of them telling them how good their content was. But like that looked like a crowded space. So I think there's still validity. I'd love Chad's thoughts as well as Kirby's, but old school marketing techniques, I think still have validity. Let me sneak in one other comment in a minute. So then what happens when you have a client? Your existing clients can help you find the next client. One, get the time to know your clients. And I would always say to my clients as I'm talking to them, I'm I want to get to know you, but you shouldn't pay for my getting to know you. So I'm not charging you for this chit chat time. I would always say to them, we're just chatting, but you're not paying for this. This is for me to get to know you. That's important to me. And then as you get to know your clients, think about them even when they're not paying you. If you see an article that's relevant to your client, send it to the client. I used to rip things out of Inc. magazine and send them to clients. Now you can just use the internet. It's so much easier. I used to actually have to put stamps on envelopes to do this in the early 90s. But
Mhm.
help clients understand that you care about them even when they're not paying you. I think that goes a long way. And of course, caring goes a long way. Tell your clients, hey, I'm looking to grow my practice. The cost of college is really high. If it's Kirby, I've got four kids and that's got a lot of college. And if you know other people I can help like I've helped you, please share my information with them. I made up an expression that goes, people hear what you tell them. If all you do is whine about being too busy, clients won't think you need new clients. So make sure clients understand, yes, you're busy, but you're still looking to grow and you have a firm of lawyers. Uh, ask your clients to provide Google reviews. I ended up with lots of Google reviews. I wasn't shy about asking. And also ask, and then I'll tell another quick story is, in the 90s, I got interested in technology. And I said, I think there's going to be work in the technology space. That turned out to be true. And so I have my first software client, a guy named Paul. And I go, Paul, do you go to any meetings? Are you part of any groups? Uh, you know, and he says, yes. Are you part of any meetings that have speakers? He said, yes, I go to a Microsoft users group and yes, we have speakers. I go, you think they would want to have a lawyer speak to them about legal issues for small technology companies? I don't know. Let me check. Long story short, he checked. I spoke. I 60, 80 people in the room and me, the only lawyer in the room. And the talk went great. And I ended up getting this client named Bill, who both had an ISP, Internet Service Provider company, and a software development company. He became a very good client, in the 90s, tens of thousands of dollars, because I created the opportunity to give this talk. Not everything works. I had a friend in my Rotary Club was the president of the Rocky Mountain Printers Association. This was a trade association back when there were still printers, hundreds of printers. Hey, Bill, can I write articles on legal issues for your newsletter? I think I wrote five. Nothing came. None of this is science. It's all art, right, Chad? It's all art. It's not science. You try things, you think it's going to work. You say, oh, God, this is going to work. It doesn't. Something else work that you're not sure about works great. You just have to engage you got to do a lot of stuff because it's not all going to work. But I grew a good, good practice with multiple people working for me doing these things.
Thank you,
I love all
Julian.
that, Julian. I thought that was great.
Mhm.
I think, one of the things you're talking about there, and a lot of the things you talked about, I think are brilliant. And as someone that had to do sales, when we become that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize when they start to do business. Guess what? You're not only the lawyer, you're the lead salesperson. And so I had to do a lot of similar things. I think you're right about, getting in the rooms, joining things like Chamber of Commerce can be really powerful. Once you find your niche, there's an old expression in marketing people like us do things like this. You got to know those things. You got to know that client and the type of things they do and the places they go, and you want to be in those rooms. And the speaking engagement thing is a really wonderful thing, that I think few people leverage, these days. And those kind of things that you talked about, Julian, kind of for me, like fall in the sales bucket. Maybe I'm a little, um, jaded because I obviously own a digital marketing agency, so I kind of think of those things. They're certainly marketing and sales. There's a fine line there, but I see those as kind of more sales activities. The only thing I would disagree with you with, though, Julian, is just that I think it is a science now. It's both. And that's actually why I love marketing, right? It uses both sides of my brain. I get to be creative. But now in the world of digital marketing, what's really, really exciting is that you actually have the data. You can see, for a particular product or service business, yeah, we really appeal to these people in this demographic in this location. So that creates scalable marketing opportunities to really grow your practice and kind of give you a little bit more control, and a bit of a gas pedal. Like we start out, most people probably spend like $10 a day max on advertising, most of our clients when they first start out. But, and we've had clients that we've had for 6, 7, 8 years even. And now they're spending much more because we've defined and been able to see the data that really works for them and what converts for them. And so we've been able to kind of double down on that and give them a sort of a gas pedal, when they want to grow, they're bringing in a new client or, bringing in some new employees. They have this like kind of scalable, thing that they can engage to kind of match their client intake with their firm growth.
Sure. Of course,
Okay,
you're engaging with a
there's
whole new world of digital stuff that you can easily monitor,
Yeah, it's
so
which
pretty
is great.
cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I love all the old
sorry.
school stuff too. People should be doing that. Sorry, Rebecca.
yeah.
That's all
Go
right.
ahead.
We're at time. So thank you everyone for your insightful presentation. Thank you to our attendees. Our next event will be on February 18th from 12 to 1, the first 90 days succeeding in your first legal job. Registration can be found on our website, and today's recording will be available on our social media channels later this afternoon. Thank you everyone and have a great
And
day.
Rebecca, I mean, are you going to provide our contact information if people want to, attendees want to follow up with us? I'm happy for you to do that.
Yeah, they can contact our office, and if they want your contact information, then we can provide it to them.
Okay, because I'm happy to talk to people.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Take care.
guys. It was a pleasure.